Yo, what is going on, Titan Clan? It is your boy King Titan X here, back with another video, and you guys already know the details. If you're new, I recommend you watch the previous parts to this, and they'll be put into like a playlist, I believe. And you'll probably end up seeing them at the top right corner of the screen. For everyone that's all caught up, let's get on with the video. When we last left off, Issei and Rias basically trying to prevent a marriage between herself and a man by the name of Riser Phoenix. Issei wasn't aware of this until later on. Much to Rias' dismay though, Riser still wanted to continue with the marriage, something that frustrated her to no end. She realized that the only way to stop this marriage from happening would have to be through a rating game, but she was nervous. Riser was known for only ever losing 2 rating games, and he was ruthless throughout these sort of games. Even when it came on to those 2 games he lost them on purpose because of his friendly relations to the families. He was a threat that she wasn't even sure her peerage could handle. Even with Issei on her side, she still felt like her group needed training. This was why they ended up going up to the mountains for training during the next 10 days. She had a summer house up there, so there would be no worries when it came on to coverage. Rias was placing a lot of her hope on Issei considering how strong he was, even as a human. He developed quickly, and this wasn't even taking into consideration the whole thing with him being the Red Dragon Emperor. During those 10 days, Issei became even stronger and developed more skills. His progress was far greater than the rest of the peerage. He was honestly unpredictable with the way he fought and how much he could pick up at a time. She questioned what exactly his lineage was because of this sort of progress he was making. It only took 10 days for Issei to jump from street level all the way to mountain level, honestly. Yes, she literally saw him destroy part of a mountain. Issei had to have been a descendant of some mythological being or something. What exactly, she wasn't sure, but there was no way he was purely human turned demon. That wasn't important in the end though. They needed to focus on the rating game after all. While they were at the event, the peerage saw everyone there. On the other side, Rias could see Riser smirking with his arms folded. He was cocky. Today he would be in for a rude awakening. As soon as everyone got into position, Rias began to give out orders for everyone. Akano, Kiba, and Konako were to place traps all over the place to combat Riser's team. Issei and Konako were sent to the gymnasium where they ended up encountering one of the rooks and 3 of the pawns on Riser's team. They thought they had the advantage in numbers, but nothing could have ever prepared them for the overwhelming strength Issei possessed. He had boosted gear on at this time. All he had done was charge up a blast. It was like an energy ball, but it was small and coming from only one of his fingers. The girls didn't really see this as much of a threat until Issei shot the attack at one of them, piercing their shoulder. A sadistic grin formed on Issei's face. Seeing one of his opponents already on the ground in pain, he forced Konako to get behind him since he wanted to make sure these guys suffered at his own hands. He used the same attack multiple times until he got bored and just threw a measly energy blast in the end at them, wrecking the gym in its entirety. The four were caught in the blast and although not dead, were quite injured. They were unable to battle any longer and were forced to retire. Issei walked out unscathed. He already made sure Konako kept her distance from the explosion from beforehand. The explosion caught the attention of many who stopped for a moment to witness this. They were shocked to see Issei be the one to walk out, especially unharmed. He seemed to be more of a threat than what his appearance let off. They needed to get rid of him as soon as possible. Riser's queen, Yubelina, charged in and took down Konako from behind their back. Konako was eliminated for the rest of the game. One member of Rias' peerage was out and it was now time for the Red Dragon Emperor. This boy seemed to actually be strong, or at the very least above some of their peerage. He was a wild card. Yubelina knew all that well. Issei saw her attack from a mile away though and shot a death beam at her. Several death beams actually. One in each finger. He shot them all at her, piercing different parts of her body. One in each arm, leg, and one pierced her hand. He was about to rush at her, but Akeno decided to take on a mistress instead. He was an important asset, and they would do well focusing on taking down as many opponents as possible right now. Focus on the weaker ones. The pawns were what made up the majority of the numbers after all. Issei regrouped with Kiba. Rias, when she saw that Akeno was focusing her attention on Riser's queen, sighed and rubbed her temples in frustration before deciding to revise her plan to accommodate for the new variables here. Rias was thinking of sending Issei out to fight Riser, but she immediately cancelled that thought. She didn't want to risk sending him out just yet. She wasn't sure what the upper limits of Riser's strength were. She would have to handle him herself. Kiba and Issei were to work together and take down the rest of the members of Riser's peerage. They wanted to object, but Rias hushed them. Issei was annoyed now. Rias had no right to go toe-to-toe with that undercooked turkey. She was meant to be his and his alone. He didn't like sharing. He would get the job done, and in a quick manner too. He decided to not let Kiba fight here. This was an important situation. He wasn't playing around as much here. I'm sorry, but I can't really yell here. Behind me! Issei yelled. Kiba reluctantly listened to Issei. He didn't know why at first, but he would learn soon. In front of the two boys were Ravel Phoenix, the youngest sister of Riser and his bishop for the time being, Riser's knights, his twin pawns, and his remaining rook. Issei stepped forward and everyone could hear him, using the strength of his boosted gear. Several boosts could be heard. Issei lifted up his arm into the air with one finger up. A red ball of destructive energy was being formed. It started off small, but those who were caught in his original explosion by the gymnasium knew not to underestimate the size of his attacks. This group would learn too. They would learn the wrath of Frieza. Dragon's Death Sphere! The ball of energy gigantified in what seemed like an instant. It eclipsed a good amount of the field. It was quite a spectacle in all honesty. It was mainly red, but there was also a bit of a purplish tint. All anyone could do at that moment was watch as Issei single-handedly eliminated 6 members of Reiza's group. They never stood a chance, sadly. There was no combating that. Reiza saw this and had a moment of shock. No way this kid had so much power. It was ridiculous to believe. He didn't believe the rumors, but now he was really seeing it for himself. Even now, though, he doubted this kid would stand a chance against him. He wouldn't focus too much on that, though, especially when he heard about the elimination of Rias's queen. He just smirked when hearing that. Rias tissed. Ubelina wasn't finished though. She wanted to quickly eliminate the blonde swordsman, but Issei stumped in front of him. He jumped and grabbed the woman by the face. She tried to fight against his grip, but it was futile in the end as he smashed her face into the ground before Kiba swung his sword at her. He used the flat side of the sword though. If Issei's attack didn't already knock her out, then Kiba's sword swinging and hitting her in the back of the head would have a good chance of finishing the deed. Sure enough, it was effective in doing its job, and they were able to successfully eliminate one of the greatest threats in the match. Rias was now the one smirking here. Reiza's eye twitched before he sucker punched Rias. Issei saw this and he glared. How rude. He went charging over to the headquarters, and he quickly promoted himself to queen. With how he felt at the moment, Reiza was going to wish he couldn't regenerate. Horns began forming around his head and his scale mail armor began to cover his body. It was originally red and green, but by the time he made it to the rooftop, it had already converted itself to having the colors white and purple. Issei's tail whipped at the floor in a menacing way while he walked over to Reiza. Oh, you're a pro... No, actually... Oh, you're a pro... Before Reiza could finish what he was about to say, Issei shot a death beam at the man's face. It didn't do anything though, as Reiza instantly healed. He was about to laugh at Issei's seemingly pitiful attempt, but Issei was suddenly right in front of him. He gave the man a right hook before headbutting him. He punched him over and over again. He barraged the man with attacks before flying up and grabbing him with his feet. He flew up before slamming Reiza's face down to the ground with his foot, sitting on top of his head. Reiza screamed and forced Issei off of him. He glared angrily at him. Rias blasted an attack at Reiza, but it didn't do much in the long run. Issei grabbed Reiza's attention once again by grabbing his throat. Hey, they said you were immortal, right? What are you going to... Reiza screamed in pain as Issei began to quite literally rip off his arm and beat him with it. Sure, he could regenerate, but there were a couple weaknesses when it came on to this sort of healing. One Issei already figured out and was beginning to abuse. The state of mind was important for those of the Phoenix clan. His body may have been immortal, but he couldn't say the same for his mind. With enough attacks dealt upon him, it would begin to wear down on his mind, his stamina, and actually crush his mind, preventing him from regenerating. Issei witnessed Reiza's regeneration firsthand, but he wasn't all that impressed. It was nice to have, but it seemed that he over-relied on this thing. He punched Reiza in the liver before kicking him in the jaw. A tail whip and a downward kick forcing him down to the ground. He paraded on Reiza's pathetic body. Every time Reiza regenerated, Issei would shoot a blast, cutting off a body part. It was a game of cat and mouse, but Riser was losing. He couldn't take this sort of pain. Eventually, he couldn't take it any longer. He screamed in horror when he tried getting Issei off of him and healing, but his mind had already degraded too much from the onslaught of attacks. He wasn't capable of regenerating any longer. Issei hadn't completely cut off his arm this time around either. He clutched his arm in pain. He was trying to stop the bleeding, but it wasn't really working. Riser freaked out and could no longer focus on anything. He was unable to fight any longer, and the rest of his team were already defeated, so the win went to Team Gremory. Riser was escorted down to the arena to get healed up, but while doing so, everyone could hear him scream bloody murder. In an act of celebration, Rias grabbed Issei's face and gave him a kiss. Issei was surprised at the sudden kiss, but he wasn't complaining. The next day, Issei found out that apparently Rias had decided to move in with his family. He didn't really get the whole meaning behind it, but he would be having Rias closer to him, so it was no issue in his book. Besides that, everything was rather peaceful for a while. Sure, they had their occasional run-ins with rogue devils, but Issei would usually KO these guys in one shot, if Rias permitted him to do so. Rias and Issei actually grew closer during these days, and they'd sometimes spend the night together, watching The Real Housewives of Japan. Yeah, the Occult Research Club also started having their meetings at Issei's house, so that was interesting. I'll be honest, I'll spare you the details and just skip ahead because everything else doesn't really change that much. All that really needs to be said is that while looking through Issei's embarrassing baby photos one day, Kiba found his eyes drawn towards a certain store that brought back painful memories for him. From there, it would be revealed that Kiba was actually a survivor of the Holy Sword Project. Well, the only known survivor of the Holy Sword Project, to his knowledge anyways. Frieza ended up finding his way back to Kuo Town, but he wasn't the only one. You see, two exorcists of the church, Zenobia Corta and Arena Shodo, were also here. They'd introduced themselves to the Gremory family, and Issei was honestly quite shocked to see Arena again. Well, he was more surprised to find out that his childhood friend was actually a girl this whole time, and he had mistaken them for a boy. He wanted to facepalm at how dumb he was before. Issei hardly cared about their presence here besides that, but when Zenobia began to bad talk Asya, he genuinely wanted to pound her face in. Kiba had less control than Issei in that moment though. He gripped his sword and was about to swing it, but Konako pulled the swordsman back. It would be bad for them to get into any unnecessary altercations after all. Kiba still called out Zenobia for what she was saying though. He was livid. Rias and the two exorcists ended up deciding to let him fight the two exorcists in a sort of sparring session. Just something to grasp each other's strength. Arena wanted to fight Issei though as well, considering their history. Rias agreed to it. She wanted to see how well Issei stacked up against these guys too. Kiba wanted to fight the two first. Issei was confused at first, but Kiba explained that they heard Asya. He could see the signs of frustration on Issei's face as well, but he was the one to actually drag them into the battle, so he should be the one to actually start the match at least, or at least have him have the first strike. Issei could focus on Arena while he focused on the blue-haired girl. Issei shrugged and agreed to it. He set up boosted gear and it began to multiply his strength and speed. He charged at Arena. It was only one boost, but he was already moving at lightning speeds. Before the girl could even realize, Issei was already behind her and he grabbed her by the shoulder. He created this move back at the mountain, but never got a chance to use it on anyone besides Akano up until now. Armor dismantled. This move, exactly like what the name conveyed, was meant to dismantle the armor of his opponents. It would allow for weak spots to be created in an army's defenses. It would also serve for a good distraction too. Just those couple of seconds of trying to process what happened to their armor would be all that Issei needed to change the tides of war. In this situation, he didn't put too much power into it, so it only ripped apart her shoulder sleeve. He then went on to claw at that shoulder piece before sucker punching her. He formed a red ball of energy that he threw at the girl. He never gave her a chance to breathe. He immobilized her in what seemed to be only a couple of moves. Zenobia's eyes widened in disbelief. The match had barely begun and her teammate was already defeated. No way. This was unbelievable. Kiba smirked and used her moment of distraction to his advantage. Several sword swings, but even with this slight advantage, it was fruitless in the end, as he wasn't strong enough to really pose a challenge to her. That wasn't the case for Issei though, as he drop kicked her as soon as she had pinned Kiba. He punched her in the throat and slapped her into a tree, knocking her out. Rias reprimanded Issei for being so rough on them. Sure, he apologized, but the both of them knew he didn't really mean it. She just thanked and had Asya heal them so they could wake up and go about their mission. Zenobia and Irina would never forget the overwhelming strength of Issei Hyodo. The next time the four would meet, it would be over lunch, discussing perhaps working together on this mission of theirs. Oh, Konako and Sanji were there too. Nice guy. Anyways, Arina and Zenobia would be skeptical at first, but reluctantly agree, especially with them remembering the overwhelming power and ferocity Issei showed in the match they had against each other. His strength would prove useful here. They did manage to get a lead and find out the people involved in this Excalibur project, Freed and this man by the name of Valper Galilei. Issei and Kiba were annoyed that this guy, Freed Selzen, was still alive. They just wanted to end him already. They tried, but he somehow still managed to slip through their fingers. Naturally, Konako, Sanji, and Issei were all punished for their misdeeds, but Konako got a lighter punishment. Unfortunately, Kiba left the House of Gramarye that day. He apologized to Rias, but he needed to avenge all of his fallen brethren all those years ago. He could never forgive himself if he let these guys just get away with what they did. It was disheartening, but everyone had to face this loss. Issei was disappointed, but could understand. He needed to focus a bit on himself as well. Lately, he started to speak more often to the soul of the dragon that lived inside of him. He remembered them warning him about this apparent rival of his that went by the name of the Vanishing Dragon, Albion. They were the antithesis to Drake and Issei. They could continuously divide the power of their opponents and absorb it into themselves. Issei found that sort of power interesting. He wanted it. He was beginning to think of ways to get a hold of that power. He was beginning to think of ways to get a hold of that power for himself. Imagine the power of both dragons in his hands, continuously getting stronger and dividing the power of his opponents. He needed it now. Little would Issei know that the power would soon be his though. Cocobile, Cocobile, I believe that's how you pronounce it. One of the leaders of the fallen angels revealed himself one day to everyone. He was the one to have stolen Excalibur, and not only that, but he dropped a couple of bombshells for everyone. The 4 great Satans and the biblical god were actually dead. They'd been covering up this information for a long time now, but there was no point in keeping it a secret any longer. The Second Great War would be happening soon enough. When Issei heard that all this guy really wanted though was to fight, he was, understandably, pretty ticked off. He was about to beat this guy's face in. It couldn't have even been for money or something. At the very least, he could somewhat justify all of what this guy did to make his friends suffer, but no. He was just battle hungry. "You stupid monkey!" Issei yelled out of nowhere. People were confused by Issei's outburst. Out of everything he could have said, why monkey? Look. Cocobile was also part of the reason why Kiba suffered so much, so we wanted to off this guy as soon as possible. He transformed into a scale mill armor and grew the large bull horns, but with his feelings at the moment, they evolved even further. Several horns formed and his body composition changed to look more like that of an alien. Xenomorph would probably be the best comparison because his head was large compared to the rest of his body, shoulder blades formed, and his back was hunched. Cocobile wanted to laugh at the impractical transformation until Issei formed a mouth cannon and shot it at them. Cocobile tried to block it, but it was no use. He only managed to push it back for a little bit and get away, but he lost a leg in the process. He cursed Issei, but he quickly had to dodge another set of attacks, this time in the form of what appeared to be red and purple saucers. He was able to initially dodge it, but there was one issue. These were manually controlled. They were like home-seeking missiles. They wouldn't stop until they hit their target. Cocobile wasn't aware of this though, and thought he managed to effectively dodge them, but he was decapitated by one of the saucers that came right back to hit him in the back of the neck. It was a brutal sight, but the fight was quick. Issei had single-handedly saved everyone. Everyone rejoiced until a new figure appeared. This figure was clad in a white and blue armor with majestic glowing wings. They looked at the deceased Cocobile and tisked. They honestly didn't care that the lunatic died. What he did care about though was the Red Dragon Emperor. He could sense his presence, but when he actually looked down at the ground, he saw a strange figure. They gave off some of Drake's energy, but at the same time it seemed diluted. Something was off. It was as if there were two souls within that body instead of just one. Well, if you didn't include Issei's soul, that is. The color of the armor wasn't red and green either. something synonymous with all of the previous wielders of the boosted gear, was that color scheme. Issei was showing white and purple. Valley demanded to know where the Red Dragon Emperor was. Issei raised his hand, and once Valley heard the boosting sound of his sacred gear, there was no longer any doubt in his mind. He rushed in at Issei, but the boy grabbed him by the arms. When Issei asked about this newcomer, Drake informed him of the fact. This was the current wielder of Divine Dividing, the White Dragon Emperor himself. Issei smirked from inside his armor. He knew what he had to do. He went on the offensive against the Valley and began to ram him through some of the surrounding area. One punch, two punches, an uppercut. He grabbed him by the foot and yanked him back down, landing into the ground. Valley was unprepared for the onslaught of attacks, and he was dazed. He was trying to gather his bearings, but Issei was still on the move. He grabbed one of the White Dragon Emperor's jewels and began to add it to his own collection. By the time Valley and Albion realized what Issei was doing, it was too late. He was screaming in pain. He was screaming to the heavens in pain as the process of adding such a power was almost like a death wish. It required a severe amount of luck and resilience to handle this metamorphosis. But by the time he was done though, a new being stepped out. This being was what you could probably say perfect. And that is pretty much all I really got for right now, Titan Clan. It is your boy Titan X signing out. You guys already know the details. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment below if you like the story and you want to just say something. Especially with the hint I dropped at the very end as well. That perfect part. That's a little hint for something I got coming eventually. I'm not going to add too much else to. I'm not gonna add any more context to that. You guys just gotta figure that out for yourselves, and that's pretty much it. Also, remember to subscribe to Purple Heart Neptune as well. I forgot to say it in the intro, but I'm gonna leave the link to their channel in the description since they actually helped me. And basically when it came on to like the power scaling for Issei here and some other stuff. Also like how some of the personalities will end up being later on in this story. Like I wanted to include them at first, but I couldn't really find a way to really make it make sense for the time being. But that's pretty much all I got for right now. I'm King Titan X signing out. Peace.